Here we go. Welcome to another Getting to Professional member. I'm Warwick Merry, your host for the evening. Hey, we're going to kick off right now. We've got a very special guest. One of the things that people have often said to me is, do you have to be funny as a speaker? And people have often responded with, only if you want to get paid. So I figured who better to have us talking about to get funny, get more money, is to have one of Australia's Comedians of the Year from a little while ago, and an all-round top bloke. So it's lovely having Mr. Marty Wilson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a real treat, a real honour. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to turn up. So I'm just getting my trendy. I've only got these Bluetooth earphones the other day, so I'm giving them a road test tonight, and they seem to be working very well. Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Hey, I'm going to just throw it to you. This is your baby, all about you. So you're in control. Go for it.
Okay. So I guess wanted to talk a little bit for 2 or 3 minutes about why humour works so well and why we need to be funny, and then take it over to how. And hopefully, if you haven't already, if you didn't notice on the Facebook thing or the emails so far, one sort of little bit of secret sauce we're going to talk about tonight, that is like what I consider to be the best first step into using humour in your presentations, into your keynotes, is to use stories that you already know. So if you don't have one yet, ask yourself while I'm talking about the why, if we were to ask your husband, your wife, your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, what's that one story or one or two stories that when you're at a dinner party and the conversation's flowing really well, you know, you just pull back into the quiver and pull out that arrow that you've used so many times before, that one old chestnut that you pull out, and when you start saying it, your partner rolls the eyes and goes, oh, geez, he's telling the Star Wars story again. Here we go. And so what's that one story that you tell all the time when you're at a barbecue or dinner party? And we'll get back to that a bit later. So just very quickly, why does humour work so well? Firstly, if you ask yourself, you know, you go onto eHarmony or RSVP or those sort of websites and ask yourself, remember, some of us would be old enough to remember those ads in the local paper, those dating ads in the local paper. What's the one thing everybody says their prospective partner simply must have? GSOH, or even VGSOH, good sense of humour. We instinctively gravitate towards people that have the ability to laugh a lot, make us laugh a lot, and in particular able to laugh at themselves. And psychological studies have shown that that's because it's a very clear indicator to people that if I laugh a lot, and particularly if I'm open to laughing at myself a lot, that shows that I'm pretty psychologically stable, have a reasonably deep sense of inner peace and well-being, and I'm someone that's safe to hang around with. You know, it all harks back to that, 10, 20,000 years ago when our brains evolved. And so we instinctively gravitate towards people who can laugh when everyone around is stressing out. And the other part of that is when you're trying to influence and persuade people, when you're trying to sell people on your ideas, there's the old, the good old basic sales training. If you need to get people to know, like, and trust you. And so when you use humour, we notice humour. For example, when you come back from a party, what's the one person that everybody talks about? When you've been away at a conference, what's the one person, what's the one speaker that everybody talks about? It's the one that entertained along with their message. And we like I've already sort of covered off the like thing when it comes to the GSOH. We like people who make us laugh. We tend to gravitate towards people who make us laugh. And the other thing is trust. It's something that they've only started doing the research on this for about the last 10, 15 years. But we actually trust people who laugh a lot. We trust people who make us laugh. They've done some studies that show that, for example, they talked about physicians, doctors over in the States, and patients who rated their physician as having a good sense of humour. They were about 1.5 times as likely to trust their diagnosis and about twice as likely to do the things that the doctor suggested they do to cope with the disease state that they've been diagnosed as having. And so they've worked out that people who make us laugh, it actually increases the credibility of the speaker. And it also, they've worked out in leadership situations, it actually increases the perceived leadership abilities of the person who is doing the speaking. So, if you can make your team laugh, the response apparently in our brains is, wow, gee, they must be on top of this. They must be all over this. They must feel comfortable within themselves if they can laugh in this moment. And so that's why it's so charismatic to be a speaker who makes people laugh. And the other part of it is that these days everyone has great content. If it was really just a downloading of facts, people could just go to Google or watch a TED talk or something like that. Everybody has fantastic content, and everybody has a best-selling book these days. You look at LinkedIn. Everybody says they're a best-selling author these days on LinkedIn. Everybody says they're an expert, a speaker, and that. So the thing that gets you particularly repeat business and booked again and makes you the star and makes you, get put on last on day 3 or on first on day 1 or have that slot, the morning after, the night before, and that sort of thing after the gala dinner, that they're the people who can, hold the crowd in the palm of their hand and really entertain them with laughter and very quickly bond with them. So you have to stand out. And this works in your marketing as well. I read an interview with Gary Vaynerchuk, and if you don't know who Gary Vaynerchuk is, you should. Look up a guy called Gary Vaynerchuk when it comes to your social media marketing and that sort of thing in particular. He is absolutely wonderful. Follow a guy called Gary Vaynerchuk, or even just search for Gary V if you haven't seen him yet. And he said, it was about a month ago now, he said, if you want to get noticed on social media, make videos, release videos that make your target market laugh. He said that is just the one thing that gets shared up the wazoo on social media. So even just getting noticed in your content that gets shared with, you still have to do all those things that everybody says about, solving problems for people, problem solution, ramp up the pain caused by their problem, all those things to do with sales theories and that sort of stuff. But if you can do that while making them laugh at the same time, it will increase the retention of your message and all those things I've already talked about. It's just incredibly charismatic to make people laugh. And that's how you get more gigs, and that's how you can raise your fees when you're going into the speaking game. So let's complete the circle and go back to use funny stories you already know. I'll get you guys to share one of your funny stories soon. But for example, there's a story that I tell. I'm mostly known in the marketplace as someone who talks about resilience through times of change. So I'm, a change speaker would be the slot that people would put me in. And I tell a story. Here's a story that I tell in my keynote. And I started off with, because we've always done it that way is no reason to keep doing anything. So I got a really good friend of mine called Sean Richards. And Sean Richards is in one of those families that everything they do it because they've always done it that way. It's family tradition. And, and then I asked the crowd, who's in a family like that? And there's, a few people put their hand up, and like, and who's married into a family like that? And then more people put their hand up. It's like, oh, I feel your pain. And then I say, so Sean's family, they live in Mossman in Sydney, and in Sean's family, every single Sunday afternoon, they have the traditional Richards family Sunday afternoon lamb roast. Every single Sunday afternoon. They've been doing it for 4 generations. If you're in the family, you just have to go. Like, blood or broken bones, like trip to the hospital with the kids is like the only reason you can get out of it. And so they've been doing this, and you have to get there at 2:00 and make the special marinade that's centuries old, or, generations old and everything. And Sean married this girl called Sophie. In Sophie's family, they have traditions too. In Sophie's family, the firstborn male child in every generation is called Richard. Now, Sean Richards didn't want a kid called Richard Richards, but he was so keen to get his lamb roast up that he gave in. And little Richie Richards was born. Richie Richards. It's quite a cool name when you're in primary school walking around. Hi, I'm Richie Richards. Like, oh, there goes Richie Richards. Hey, Richie Richards. First day of big school, Richie comes home in floods of tears, absolute floods of tears. He's like, "Oh, Mum and Dad, please don't send me to big school. I can't go to big school." And Sean and Sophie are like, "Oh, what is it, mate?" They're totally taken aback, surprised. Like, "What is it, mate? Look, I know not many of your friends went to the school. Like, I can't go to big school. Please let me go back to primary school." And I know it's a much bigger school, like about 1,000 kids. "I can't go to big school, please." Like, "What is it, mate? What went wrong?" And "They call me Double Dick." And that always gets a really big laugh. Now, quite possibly not on the webinar here, and I'm okay seeing your blank faces out there. That's absolutely no problem at all. But it always gets a really big laugh. Then I do a whole bit about actually a bit of a recycled stand-up comedy that I used to do about people naming their kids. Because I grew up in Newcastle, and our local member in Newcastle, state member for 32 years, was the Right Honourable Richard Face. And like all that, so I just go through a few names and a bit of stand-up comedy material about that. But the point is, after I've got the crowd laughing, see, like when you've just got a crowd absolutely burst out laughing, they absolutely know, like, and trust you. They absolutely adore you. And so you can, within reason, almost anything that comes out of your mouth next, they will believe and trust. So what I do when I say that, I tell that story, and then I say, because we've always done it that way is no reason to keep doing anything. So I tell them, the reason I tell you that story is this. And so my point is about squeezing in those stories that you tell, you tell in your social life. Firstly, the biggest reason for you to start, if you want to start using humour in your keynote, is use stories that you already tell. Because, when I started using that story in my keynote, I must have told that story probably 50 times before I started telling it in my keynote. And so if you tell a story, particularly a funny story that you know really well, like your eyes start to sparkle, you start to smile, you can't help yourself because you know where it's going, and you know that the punchline is going to work because you've told it socially many times before. You're on stage and your shoulders broaden. It's just a natural thing if you're telling a story that you're confident in telling. So when people come to me for a bit of humour training and that sort of thing, I say, look, find 3 stories that you've told many times before. Put one at the start, one right at the end, and one about 2/3 of the way through. And then use these phrases to justify the reason why you've put those stories in there. So, this story is a perfect illustration of ... The lesson we can all learn from this story is ... because we've always done it that way is no reason to keep doing anything. I tell you this story because, or this story reminds us all to ... even just connect with them about the feeling in the story. Have you ever felt ... have you ever felt that that moment when you've been sticking to because you've always done it that way, and it's all of a sudden blown up in your face? Get them, to very quickly connect with the story on an emotional level. So the point I'm making is that when you've just made them laugh, because when you make somebody laugh, like their brain is absolutely flooded with those delightful feel-good neurochemicals that we all get when someone's given us a big belly laugh, and they're willing to listen and trust you. So, because people say, "Oh, can I really tell these personal stories in a keynote, about marketing with Facebook ads or something like that?" I said, yes, absolutely. The more personal your story is, the more universal it is. As long as you keep connecting it back to, have you ever had this happen in your life? Have you ever felt like that in your life? Have you ever done something like that with your kids? And then people connect with you on a really personal and deeper basis. So, who's got a story? Who's got a story they'd love to tell? Who's got a story they'd love to tell? And we can all workshop together. So if you could tell us what the niche is, or what the keynote is that you'd like to funny up, what it's about, and then tell us what the funny story is, and we'll help you with those phrases to justify why it should be in there. Or just quickly before we do that, the way I point out that almost any story can be used is that, for example, that Richie Richards story, I used to tell that, I wrote them down. Hang on, where are I used to tell that story to illustrate the fact when internal alarm bells are going off, pause, take time out and listen to them. Because, you know, when Sean Richards was wanting to call his kid Richie Richards, he had these internal alarm bells going off, and he didn't. He just ploughed on through because he wanted his lamb roast so badly. And I also used to use it to illustrate the thought, when any decision will have long-term consequences, think it through carefully. In another keynote I used to do a few years ago. And today I'm using it to illustrate the point you can use any story in your content as long as you tell them why. And when people doubt that that's a valid premise, that you can use a story and repurpose it lots of different ways, if I said to 100 people, what is the main moral of Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Or what is the main point of Rapunzel? Or even what is the moral in the original Star Wars movie or something like that? You'd probably get 40 or 50 different responses from 100 people. I feel like I'm on Family Feud now. And I feel like, so the point is, most stories, depending on who you think the main character is, who you identify with the most stories can legitimately be said to illustrate about, 8 or 10 morals or precepts. So if you've made them laugh, they love you to bits, and you tell them straight then what the moral of that story is, I promise you they will believe you. Okay? Right. Who's got a funny story?
So at the moment, everyone's muted. If you want to tell your story, wave your hand or unmute yourself, and we will take you off, and you can have a go. All right, Dr. Nerol. All right, you've been unmuted.
I'm unmuted. Hello there. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, so we're a double act. So I'm here with Mike, my other half here. We're working on a joint keynote, which is all around the fact that Mike nearly killed himself in a motorbike accident a few years ago. He was in a wheelchair, and then slowly came back and triumphed and went on to do awesome things. So it's kind of around, goal setting, not letting challenges get in the way, but with our unique take on it.
Bit of a resilience sort of thing.
Yeah. And one of the stories is when Mike was in hospital, he was having one of the surgeries he had on his legs. He broke both his legs and broke his back in 6 places, I think. And it was in a hospital where there were a lot of overseas nurses, a lot of Asian nurses. And he was just coming out of the anaesthetic.
I was off my face.
He's off his face. So I've come into
my wife is an accident emergency nurse. She has so many wonderful stories about people coming to from anaesthesia.
So I've come in to visit him, and I've walked into the room, and there's this state of confusion. There's this little tiny Asian nurse, and there's Mike in his hospital gown just coming out of this anaesthetic. And he's really angry. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's saying to him, you'll have pen? You'll have pen? And he's like, what? Have I got a pen? What are you talking about? You have pen? You'll have pen? He's like, I've just had an operation. Why would I have an effing pen? And I had to kind of say, Mike, she's asking you if you have pain. And I think it's about halfway through the keynote. And the message we had after that was just around, there are times when you just have to laugh, even when you're in the middle of the most traumatic situation. Humor unites us. You just have to laugh. I don't know if there's any more deep message behind it than that, but I just thought it's such a cool story. And if we can act it out, it was very, very funny at the time. It still makes me laugh when I think about it. What do you think? Very simple.
Yeah. I definitely, it's a cracking story. Could I help you tweak the punchline to it just
Absolutely.
a little bit? Instead of just say, it might even be okay if you say that the nurse said, "Are you feeling any pain?" because the way you say it, there's no room for the audience to make that leap themselves and jump to what the conclusion is.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and it's one of those things, you'd have to try it out a couple of ways, or maybe because if you say the nurse is asking, what would be the best way to do it? And again, like all humour, we can talk about. You have to try it out and see which way gets the biggest laughter. But just it might be better if you let if you're in the room and you can say, and I can see what she's trying to say, and then she realizes and she rolls her eyes and says, No, I'm asking, in your legs, if you're feeling any pen.
You have pen
and then
in your legs.
just change your pronunciation when you say it the second time, so that the audience makes the leap for themselves rather than you you open it to them. You explain it fully to them. So just quickly try that, because if you can get the audience to do the work and feel clever about themselves, you quite often get a much bigger laugh for it.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's throw it open to everybody who's open to having a stab. Because I think it could be one of those things that there could be. I don't know what your keynote, some of the themes of your keynote are, but that story could be. It could be an illustration of when. Sometimes when you're trying to be resilient and come back from things that are really hard, sometimes the roadblocks that get thrown up at you are actually just roadblocks of perception, not roadblocks that are actually physically there. Sometimes it's just all in your head that there's a real problem here, when it's just a simple little thing that you can just flick a switch in the back of your head and that problem totally goes away. That's one thing for it. And it really is, I'm a massive fan of, with any of these sort of things, if you go away and write a dozen of them or 24 of them, and then there'll be 2 or 3 where you just go, oh, that's it, that's fantastic. So it could be that, when it comes to resilience, there are times when you don't realise someone is trying to help you because of preconceived ideas in your head. Be open to getting help from people all around you. That could be the moral of it. Does anybody else throw their hat in the ring as to what the moral of this story could be for Neril?
The obvious one's communication. You can talk about, simple communication barriers, or understanding other people's point of view or perspective, as you were saying before. But that's definitely one that I'd put. Or even if yourself, sometimes when you're not listening clearly, or sometimes when you're affected by things around you, such as anesthetic, you might not understand the message that's straight in front of you.
Yeah.
And even sometimes maybe you get so caught up in your own pain or the things you're using to deal with that pain that you don't see, the real truth of what's around you, or something like that. Anyone else?
Good ideas.
Thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you. I think all of those are stronger messages than what we were working with, so that's really helpful.
Yeah, so maybe have a think about, whether you're doing your 3 key messages, your 5 key messages, your 7 key messages, or whatever it is in your keynote. Have a think about just maybe a reworking of one of those, how one of those could be, a rephrasing of that, or whatever could be. And that's what led me into point number 4, which is that sort of thing. So things you already want to say, use that story to illustrate one of those points that you already want to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. That's great. Thank you.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. So anybody else want to share? We've probably got time for one more funny story before we move on to coping with when it doesn't work.
Any stories? Come on, shoppers. Here's your opportunity. You have the comic of the year who's going to show you what to do. Shape your story. Now's your chance. Who's up for it?
I don't have a fully fledged story, but I do have a way that I use a bit of. So I just wanted to run a little scenario.
Yeah, sure.
I don't tend to tell particularly funny stories, but I tend to tell emotionally connecting stories that people relate to. So they do that slight humour. Then I actually take it into a story of examples of, and I pretty much cover everyone in the room, and it's about when they go shopping. And so I exaggerate the different ways people shop.
Yep.
Now, I do that with, someone who writes a list and then they walk in through the shop and they have to write more words on the list so that get the satisfaction of ticking it off, because that'll feel to the person that what list? They just go shopping and 3 hours later they might come back with maybe 2 things that they should. And I do this to let people get related. What I haven't, and then I actually go into a bit of profiling. I lead it into profiling, but I don't quite have what you're talking about there, about that kind of smoothness from relating to those 4 stories and then moving it into a why. Because I've got the why, like I know what the why is, but I think I'm missing sharing the why.
Okay. Could you show me how you do at least one of the shoppers? Like, just like be in your keynote for a second and show me how you do one of the shoppers. It's Chatham House rules. This video will go nowhere except the public vault in the PSA.
Well, I tell the one about the person that, you know, been getting everybody for the last week writing up on the board every single item that we need for that shopping, because I'm the one that's actually going to do this. And so I have that list and it goes into my phone, and then I walk into a shop and I have to go through the order of the shopping aisle, because you have to do that. Order is good. And what happens is that I see something on the shelf and I go, oh, I need that too. So I stop, I add it into my list, and then I keep going, because I have to be able to tick it off, you see. By the time I get to that part of the story, everyone's got it. I don't actually have to go any further. So I actually almost don't finish it.
No, that's absolutely fine. That is one thing I would just a quick bit of feedback about when you're trying to do those shoppers. There's an old thing about don't use narration, use first person present dialogue, and act and be that person doing the shopping, and have a different voice for each of those 4 people that you do. Like when you do it, you're like, we've all lived with flatmates who like, okay, butter 250 grams, and put on that, we've all had that pain in the ass flatmate that writes their name on the milk, and like, this is Nerili's milk. This is not your milk, Jenny. Just a bit of that sort of thing, and be that person. Say like, and so I'm walking down. It's butter 250 grams, and then she sees and be really specific about what it is. She sees the clotted cream. Oh, clotted cream isn't on my list. Oh, clotted cream. Tick. And really be that person and act it out, not just tell people about the person, just transform into that person for 15 seconds while you do it, and I promise you'll get a bigger laugh from that.
Okay.
And so in your mind, what, apart from just the bonding with everyone in the room, what point do you currently draw out of the fact that you've done, illustrated that people shop differently?
Is that everybody is going to function differently in a team, and they all have something that's actually beneficial in that contribution. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, to be honest, that's it. And so just you remember those phrases I talked about before. The way we all approach shopping is the perfect illustration of ... Okay. The lesson we can all learn from the way that we all shop. And I'm happy to put these up on Facebook or email these things to Warwick afterwards, and he can send them out. And I run through the fact we do this because ... These the way we all shop reminds us all that ... So just be really clear once you've made everybody laugh using your characterizations. Like, now I'm going to tell you why I did that. And then tell them why you did that. And this is a really important illustration. The point I'm making is this. And because you've just made them bust a gut laughing, and their heads are flooded with dopamine and serotonin, and they're loving you to bits, they'll take on your point far more deeply.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
No worries at all. Anyone else? Go on with you. It's okay if you don't, but I'm really open to hanging around as long as anyone would like me to. So it's no problem at all if you'd like to, but I'm not remotely offended if you're not up for it either. Okay. So the great thing, a couple of things I'll finish on is like the great thing about this is they don't even have to be your stories. If you ask yourself, oh, geez, I haven't really got any stories, I'm not totally sure about that one, ask Professor Google. Professor Google is the greatest source of funny stories that you can use in your speaking. And as a tip, this is a stand-up comics thing. Some speakers don't like to do it because I'm a former stand-up comic. I have absolutely no qualms whatsoever. It's funnier if it happened to me or a very close personal friend of mine, and it's funnier if it happened last week. When you go and see a comedian and they say, the old, a funny thing happened on the way here. If something is closer to me personally, the emotional stakes are higher. And if it happened more recently, the emotional stakes are higher. And therefore, in a lot of humour, you think what's happening is up here, then all of a sudden the story jumps to this story and you realise, oh, no, this has been happening the whole time. That thing about like the word pain, like the word pen and pain. Like there's actually two stories going on. When your brain leaps down to this one, that's what causes everybody to laugh. And so the emotional change between the two stories, particularly if someone falls flat on their face, which a lot of humour comes from, is greater when it either happens to me or a very close personal friend of mine. So if you find a story on Google, maybe it might have happened to a very close friend of mine because strictly between you and I, and I'll deny it if word gets out, Sean Richards actually isn't a personal friend of mine. He's a friend of a friend. But in the story, I say that he's a really good friend of mine that I went to school with, because then the emotional stakes are higher and it gets a bigger laugh. I've tried it saying, I've met this guy and he told me this story once, and it doesn't get as big a laugh. And so it happens to a close personal friend of yours, and it happened last week. So you can go to Professor Google and type in these phrases like, whatever the sector is in your industry, the top 5 funny stories from your industry. Start collecting funny stories. So ask Professor Google, funny your topic stories, funny your industry stories. Sorry, I'm making brackets in the air. They're parentheses. So hopefully you're getting that. I'm just getting very adamant about it all. Dumbest, your industry stories. Dumbest sector you are trying to sell to stories. If you're going into a sales meeting with Toyota or something like that, do a quick search of funny stories, funny car sales stories, funny car industry stories, funny car manufacturer stories, depending on what sector you're talking to. Dumbest sector you are trying to sell to stories, or sector whose event you are speaking at, epic fail, or stuff like that. Just search for things that you can weave into your content using some of those phrases that I talked about before. Because hello,
I just wanted to ask a question in there.
Sure.
About I work in the construction industry most of the time, and you would say that there are stories that could be hilarious every single day, but it's a matter of viewing the world in that way. I mean, I work with a lot of people that have got experience and a lot of people that are quite junior, and we're experienced people in the industry, and we often laughing in the office about how useless this person was or how they just don't have a clue. But you can't really say that in public.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of, how do I come up with how do you view the world in such a way that it just creates the humour, right? I'm more your technician person, your engineer. And engineer.
Yeah. I'm trying to train him.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, for starters, if I were you, I would follow a guy on Facebook and watch the TED Talk of a guy called Andrew Tarvin, Tarvin. He's a friend that I met at the Funny Business Conference in San Francisco. And
is he really a friend?
No, he actually really is a friend. He really is a friend. And he calls himself a humour engineer. So watch all of the content he's got up there. I'm sure you'd find it really instructive, and it would work with the way your brain works.
Okay.
But also when it comes to road testing things that are you taking them out of the building game, the construction game, like road test them on your friends, road test them on people who aren't in the building game, and, start creating a list of ones that, wow, everyone laughs at that story. Like, that's one of those stories that seems to just hit a button. You don't have to be in the industry to laugh at it. Like, because I used to be a pharmacist, and my old pharmacy buddies and I have loads and loads of stories that make us laugh. Yeah. And but some of them, they're about the regulations involved in pharmacy and the sort of equipment you have to keep in your pharmacy, and some of them are about I was making a morphine mixture once. Sadly, one of the customers had terminal cancer, and the son was in getting it, and he was like, "Oh, come on, mate, come on! How long is it going to take? How long is it going to take?" And I'd had a really bad day, and I said, "Mate, please excuse my language. I'm not making a fucking milkshake. Piss off," and gave him the script and made him walk out. And to my pharmacy buddies, that's a hilarious story, absolutely hilarious. But to the general public, it's just like, well, that's, those sort of frustrations, doesn't really work. But there are stories, and I've gradually worked out through trial and error which ones they are. For example, and in one of my keynotes, I talk about, one of the last things I talk about in my resilience keynote, I talk about the importance of maintaining a smile and laughing. And so, when you're back in your industry, make sure you swap stories to make sure it totally is an excuse to make the audience laugh for 2 minutes. I make sure you swap stories whenever you're back with your friends, your old university buddies, or, your old work colleagues. Swap stories that made you laugh at the time, just to remind yourself that there's humor everywhere. And I tell this story about this little old couple who were, so back when I was a pharmacist, Viagra had only just come in, and it was very, very expensive. It was like $120 for a pack of 10. And this lovely little old couple that I knew quite well were coming in to trying to get their Viagra on the QT, trying to get it without anybody noticing they were getting it. And so they were right down the end of the pharmacy, I took them down the end, and they were, signing their prescription. And the old gentleman saw the price of them, and he's absolutely exploded at the top of his voice in the shop, and he's like, $120 for a pack of 10 Viagra? I can't afford that. Like, this should be on the national health. This is ridiculous. I need this Viagra to make love to my wife. and the wife is just rolling her eyes, like, knowing that her cover was busted, and so she's just nudged him in the ribs and said at the top of her voice also, like, "Oh, don't worry, Darl, that's a year's supply." and it's just a lovely little story that I have to admit, I shoehorn it into my keynote at an appropriate moment, just because I know it's a really guaranteed laugh. But there are lots of funny stories that I have tried to tell over the years that just haven't worked. So it really is a little bit of trial and error.
There are a few little stories. Neril mentioned that had an accident a while ago. So learning how to do new things. And there's obviously learning how to do a bunch of new things. One of them was having to try and use the toilet from a wheelchair. So you never really tried to make anything funny out of that, but you obviously could make something funny out of that.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. And again, acting that out, miming, getting down on stage, like, you're sort of halfway through, then you suddenly realise, I'd forgotten this. I don't know what your experience is, but there would be, in the movies, you see someone doing something that's really difficult, and they get 3/4 of the way through it, and they suddenly realise they have to be back over there to get that other thing they need to do the thing they're doing, and just that sort of stuff. I'm sure would work for all those sort of scenarios.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
All right. Question, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I just want your advice on this off the back of what you were saying then. I've used a couple of bits of humour over the years that seem to just fall into some of my stories. And for the first time in 23 years, I had a HR director approach me and say, given all that's happening with Me Too and women having horrific things done to them and so on by bosses and you name it, I can't have you do that sort of humour anymore if you're going to continue to speak in our organisation. And it's simple stuff like, I've often that one-liner that's not mine that I love it, but, my ex-wife, in hindsight, brilliant housekeeper because she got to keep the house. Just stuff like that has always got a good laugh for me. I'm now being told, no, you've got to stay away from anything that puts down a member of the opposite sex. Is that your experience, or do we need to kind of just be a little more conscious of that these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, it really is. You really do have to take your audience's lead on that sort of thing. And there's a comedic phrase called punching down, where, anyone who is in a lesser position of power or status or, economic ability, having jokes at their expense can always get you in trouble. And I think the three things I always tell people that you can make fun of, just if you want to stay into a safe area, which are probably a good message to get across in this, is common frustrations, shared enemies, and yourself. But when it comes to yourself, it can't be your abilities to do your job or your abilities to, if you're at a sales conference and you're talking about sales, or, if you're an accountancy conference and you're an accountant, don't go, oh, I'm hopeless with numbers, mate. You have to, don't make fun of your ability to do the thing that you're up there to do.
Yeah,
but
got it.
You can make fun of yourself as a father. You can make fun of yourself as a mother. You can make fun of yourself as a commuter. You can make fun of yourself as someone who hates meetings in the office. But I think any time you make fun of a group of people in the room that you are not a member of, you can get yourself in trouble. My rule of thumb for this thing is if you ain't one of them, don't make fun of them.
Okay.
And so the only and people take me to task on this sometimes. The only thing that breaks that rule is, in the corporate sense, it's still okay for women to make fun of men, particularly men in power. And I'm okay with that. If you look around the gender pay gap and that sort of stuff, we're doing all right. If we can't take being the butt of a few jokes, then, that's just tough luck as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, but this is a general rule of thumb. If you ain't one of them, don't make fun of them is my general rule. And then you can just never get in trouble.
Gold. Thanks, Marty.
Marty, an interesting extrapolation of that principle. I'm married to a Sri Lankan and therefore have quite a bit of interaction with my in-laws, who speak with a very strong accent. And frequently I will tell the story where I'm talking to them. I am the punchline, but I use their accent when they're replying. I've only once had an issue with that in the last 10 years. And it was one individual who had an issue. The organisation didn't have an issue because they've been put in a good light. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I'm one of them because it's family, but I'm a white boy and they're chocolate. So
yeah. And I'm so glad you said that, not me. It's the same sort of tip that I give for people. Sometimes ask me about eulogies, about how to make people laugh at a eulogy, and the way to do that is you make sure you say right at the start, the person who's in the casket would want us to laugh at this.
Okay.
And so, you could even, with respect to you doing your wife's family's accent, my mother-in-law took me aside and she schooled me how to do the accent properly, because I was telling this story and I wasn't, only the words that you use. I was saying this, and she said, no, if you're going to do this, if you're going to make fun of my accent, you make sure you do it well. Make her be laughing when she tells you that story, and so set it up that she helped you tell this story. Then it really explicitly says that she's given you permission to tell this story.
And I usually would do that at the tail end, because I tell the stories or whatever, and then say, and by the way, we'll go around and they say, are you still telling stories about us from stage? And I'm like, oh yeah, well, where's my money? I want some, So
yeah. But it's find a way that is funny in itself for her to be coaching you in her accent,
framing it up. Got it.
Yeah. Just doing that at the start. So the last bit of it is because people always ask me, what do you do when a joke doesn't work? How do you handle it when a joke doesn't work? So the first part of it, that's partly why I say, if you want to be funny as a speaker, don't tell jokes. At least not at the start. Tell funny stories. And then, because when you're telling a funny story, you're not, when you say a joke, like a one-liner, like the one you said before, Ian, people know it's a joke, they recognise it's a joke, and they know that they're expected to decide whether it's funny or not, and then how loud they're going to laugh. And like, there's this tension in the room that, okay, we're all going to decide whether that's funny or not. Half of us did, half of us didn't. Bit of tension here. I can feel some buttocks clenching, and it just sets up a dynamic that, you know, particularly if you're only just starting doing this, that can be quite intimidating. And so my tip for the start is just tell stories, and don't say, I've got a really funny story about this, because that, again, that just sets up the expectation that this is going to be really funny. Just start telling a story, and if you do the punchline or you do the final twist and it only gets like a 3 out of 10 laugh, you just keep going. And there is no expectation. There's no, we need to judge if this is funny or not. Oh God, no one's laughing. Is he okay with that? Is she okay with that? Oh gosh, she thinks she's moving on. Do you not understand? There's no build-up of tension based on whether the crowd laughed or not. So when you're starting, just tell funny stories. Don't try and tell jokes.
So can I just ask a question there? Because one of the things that's been said to me by various coaches along the way is that you've actually got to give people a cue to laugh, even in a story. So if it is a funny bit and they don't laugh, just stop and kind of say, you know, give them a look or give them a gesture or pause to kind of instruct them to laugh. So which is better?
And there's definitely a fine art in how long you leave that pause before you realise, oh geez, this is going nowhere, I'll just move on. But like when I was very fortunate when I was over in the UK, I was actually asked to do the Norwegian Comedy Festival. There was me and 3 other guys, 2 girls and 2 guys. We were the only English-speaking act at the festival. And we went to the Late and Live, like the late night comedy tent afterwards, and we heard comedy in Norwegian. And it was just hilarious because you could tell where the punchlines were without knowing a word of the language. So, and so you could tell where the humour was. And so I know what you're saying, you know, to a point, you can use your phrasing to let them know, you know, and here's my big reveal. But then you've got to be prepared for the fact, either just keep going if it was a funny story, or you can do the other thing, which I'm going to suggest to you: pre-write a bank of savers. Savers are what comedians use when a joke that either normally gets a 9 out of 10 only gets a 4 out of 10, or a joke they wrote as they were walking on stage or wrote on the train on the way there or something like that, and they thought it was going to be laying down comedy gold in front of the audience, and you just get the crickets. What you do is the most important thing is that you don't let the audience see that it perturbed you in any way at all. So you just stand there with a big smile on your face, and Arndo's an old mate from Comedy Days. He uses this a lot. He just goes, I don't care. That's my favourite joke. And just stands there with a big smile on his face and lets the audience see that he's not worried. Because if they see you're not worried, they won't be worried. And another one is you can say, if I'm trying out some new material, I always keep a $50 note in my top pocket. And if I say something and it doesn't get a laugh, I get that $50 note out, and you go up to, even come off the stage, whoever put you on that stage, if the conference organiser is near the stage, or someone in the organisation's near the stage, and say, oh, geez, I was talking to Jenny before I went on. She bet me $50 that joke wouldn't work. There it is. No, you got it. All yours. And just and laugh it off. Laugh it off. Even just a little thing like, this is sort of my favourite go-to one, is just that inside my head, that was really funny. Just not out there. And that's okay. And then as long as they can see you have a big smile on your face, they really don't care. And the last one that I say is, and I feel a bit bad saying, I feel a bit bad when I do it, but I do it nonetheless. I blame it on one of my kids. I say, like my kid told me, Dad, I got a joke for you. And he told me that joke, and I'll tell him he stunk up the place. And it doesn't make me a good person, but it gets me out of a bind. And I think, to be honest, half the people know that I'm just making it up. But there's something about if a little kid, that's a good tip that if you've got a joke that you're only half sure of, and it makes sense that say my 11-year-old told me this joke today, and then say the joke. Or, my 11-year-old responded with that. And because I used to tell a joke, what's red and invisible? No tomatoes. And never got a laugh. I thought it was hilarious, but never got a laugh. But when I said, my 8-year-old told me this joke today, what's red and invisible? No tomatoes. Like always got like at least a 5 or 6 out of 10 laugh. So blame it on your kid. What a great way to finish up. What a great way to finish up a webinar.
I know when I'm doing MC stuff and I'll throw out a whole lot of stuff that I'll make up on the spot. Sometimes I'll get a one person laugh or one or two people laugh. So I'll go, hey, thank you to that one person who laughed at the joke. Or the other time I'll tell something and I'll go, that was supposed to be funny. Oh, well, and just keep moving. And I frequently get a huge laugh on that was supposed to be funny. Yeah. It is that not letting them, just knowing it's like, this is what happens. And as you know, and a lot of the comics that I've seen over the years, they've crashed and burned as many times as they've done really, really well. And that's just part of getting better at the art form. So, Marty, thank you so much for giving us so many great tips on how to get better at being funny and including humor in it. For those of you who don't know, Marty's done a few things to add a bit of humor. And one of them is he's got a great book from More Funny, More Money with a whole lot more details in it. And recently, you've just had a great big online conference where you interviewed a ton of comedians. Is that still available?
Oh, yeah. No, the International Business Humour Summit. Yeah. There was only 2 comedians on it. The rest of it are actually just speakers. It was just was one of those things that I did. I think I really missed the green room banter from being a stand-up comic, and so I just started interviewing other speakers because like all the whatever there is, there's sort of 10 or 12 of us on this call. You know what it's like when you're a speaker. Like if I'm on at 9:30 and you're on at 11, we might not even see each other, let alone have a chance to sit around in the green room and have a chat. Or whereas when you're a stand-up, you go away for the whole weekend and you have breakfast together and you hang around the green room and you chat about the business of what you do and the art of what you do, the craft of what you do on a much deeper level.
Right.
And so I ended up just rounding up. There's 39 of the world's just funniest speakers, 1 cartoonist and two full-time stand-ups. And we just spoke about how to put humour into your keynotes. It was... I'm still processing everything I got out of it because it only finished about 2 months ago, but it was absolutely transformative for my speaking. It's
right.
Brilliant. Like without getting all salesy on you, it's bloody brilliant.
And so if we're interested, we can go to your website, yeah?
I'm trying to think what would be the best place because I haven't, it's only just finished, so I haven't even got it loaded up. Go to probably best to just email me because it isn't up there on my website yet. No. Marty@martywilson.com.au.
Or shoot him an email, marty@martywilson.com, yeah?
Yeah, so it's like I worked out if you put all these speakers onto a stage, it's like $500,000 worth of speakers, private interviews with them, and it's $197. It's
cool.
Bloody brilliant.
Check it out. But Marty, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being here. And as I say, I'll throw this in the vault and there you go. So Julian's just like, you only got half it, mate. Watch the other half on the vault. It'll be there by tomorrow lunchtime or something. I'll put something on Facebook. Awesome. Hey, thanks everyone for being here. Look forward to your company next month. No idea what it's going to be about, but I'm sure it'll be an absolute cracker. Can't wait. Alrighty. Thanks, Marty.
Thanks, guys. All the best.